I am Jonathan Brent, and I'm Executive Director of the YIVO Institute. This conference has special meaning for us because YIVO was born in Vilnius, as many of you know. Today, we are working with the Lithuanian National Library and the Central State Lithuanian Archives to preserve and digitize the documents that had been gathered and archived by the YIVO Institute in Vilnius that remained in Lithuania at the end of World War II. The majority of the material was discovered by the US Army in 1945 and in 1947. It was shipped from Offenbach, Frankfurt, Germany, where the Nazis had sent it, here in New York, and is now in our archives. But the remnant remains. It's a very important part of our story. It tells us that the narrative that this great institution, the YIVO institution, attempts to build through its collections, both of documents and books, is an evolving narrative. It is one that we don't yet know entirely. And I would say that the same very much applies to the narrative of Jewish life in Lithuania before the war, during the war, and indeed, to some extent, after the war. It's been almost 70 years since the end of World War II and almost 25 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. We live in a time of tremendous introspection about the world catastrophes of the 20th century. Coming to terms with the brutal Soviet regime has hardly yet begun in Russia, incredibly enough. And Eastern and Central Europe are still at the beginning stages of coming to terms with that awful history. But coming to terms with the Holocaust is an infinite task. It is only with the demise of the Soviet Union that doing so throughout Eastern and Central Europe has become possible. And doing so at the same time that its Soviet past must be examined and understood is a daunting task indeed. For the younger generation of Eastern Europe, the Soviet horrors are remembered history, while the horrors of the Holocaust were largely erased from national memory from 1945 to 1991. As one can see in the monuments to the Holocaust, even at Babi Yar in Kiev, there is not a single monument, including the menorah that was erected by Chabad, that has the word Jew in it, or Jewish people. And so the enormity of the catastrophe of Babi Yar is not even part of the public record in Ukraine. The task of reconstruction depends upon historical facts, of course, but the meaning and the purpose of these so-called facts depends entirely upon the narrative that is developed around them. And this narrative is a matter of both public and individual consciousness. It requires the building up of a public consciousness in which facts can find a receptive and meaningful place. It requires an inward turn, and that is the purpose of this discussion today, to encourage the building up of a consciousness that will give these facts some meaning. The work of those who support this effort look toward a living future. The discussion today, for which our participants are historians, writers, thinkers, and statesmen, represents an effort at helping to build that public consciousness among both Lithuanians and Jews who are Lithuanians and Lithuanians who are Jews. That will lead us to a greater understanding of the meaning and the purpose of the profoundly painful history that we can neither escape nor fully grasp. It is with great gratitude that I acknowledge the participation of the Lithuanian Embassy and its representative, Ambassador Žygimantas Paviljonis, today, of the Lithuanian Consulate and Consul General Valdemaras Sarapinas, and the support that was given to us by the Lithuanian Foreign Minister Linas Linkevičius. The instantaneous acknowledgement of the importance of this discussion was so gratifying. The moment we proposed it, they said, yes, we would like to participate. Tablet Magazine is a co-sponsor. The summer literary seminars and Mikhail Iossel and Anna Halberstadt have been completely instrumental in developing this panel. Karen Underhill at the University of Illinois, Chicago, was heroic in her efforts at organizing the simulcast that was going to take place yesterday, but was impossible because of the snowstorm, unfortunately. Michael Trayson of the YIVO board was instrumental in developing that simulcast to Chicago as well. But I wish to give very special and deep thanks to Helena Gindi, our director of programs, who worked feverishly and pretty much around the clock on all of the details that went into this conference. And it's only a pity that it could not have been held last night when we had originally planned it. I wish also simply to mention that Tomas Venslava, who had agreed to participate and who was set to come, was unable to do so, partly because of the weather and partly because he's just had some minor surgery, which has nevertheless incapacitated him to some extent. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome to the podium the Lithuanian ambassador to the United States, Žygimantas Paviljonis, who will say some words.
Well, I had some kind of talking points bureaucratically written for me, but sorry, I will not make it. I will make it more personal because, well, this space is special, and people who are gathered here, you are special and important. You are not like a usual audience I usually work with. I really wanted my foreign minister to stand instead of me here and to make it kind of symbolic because today it is a historic day. Today, first time, we as Lithuania, we chair the Security Council like a foreign minister will personally make it first time in our history today. After all and difficult captive nations story, we wanted him also to come here, symbolically, because, well, we shouldn't forget that it is also very much with Litvak support from United States we've been able to fulfill that dream. Your help in our NATO accession drive and the fight for freedom was very important. Well, snow changed the plan, but I'm very happy that he did it yesterday during the dinner with some of you. It was also very difficult for me to come because of the snow, but I did it, and I feel that I had to do it. Why? And I will explain why in maybe 3 or 4 points. For me, relations between Lithuania and Litva community and Jewish community and Israel was kind of personal because I'm convinced that with everything we did, and we did miraculous things in Lithuania, we are one of the fastest growing EU economy, now chairing the Security Council, just finished our first EU presidency and so on. Everything is great. President Obama was calling us just half a year ago, like one of the most successful transformation stories. But I was always telling to my colleagues, it's okay, it's nice, but what about human side of it? You know, what about human dignity side of it? What about personality level? And I think in conferences like this, they are very important for us because we are going deep into ourselves, you know, into identities we lost, into harmony we once had, into kind of Lithuanians, if you want, that was into identity that was building the region for 500 or 600 years, into something that was lost in 20th century. We've been going very national, very ethnocentric. But now new generation is coming who is searching for something different. And during conferences like this, we are kind of bridging to the past and trying to reestablish this lost identity and understanding. It's not only on personal level, but also on community level. I'm already 4th year here like ambassador. From the day of my arrival, I tried to convince my fellow Lithuanian Americans, and they're quite powerful in America, 1 million of us. I'm always saying 1/4 of my tribe is here. I was telling to them, to this 1 million, look, you know, you are living very close to Litva communities. They are everywhere, starting from New York, Chicago, LA. Do you have some contacts, connections? Do you make some events? And I started to make those bridges, asking them to build them. You know, we had a lot of events. Last was during so-called Lithuania Days in Philadelphia, the whole Lithuanian week. And most important event was with Litva community, with Jewish Museum here, with Consulate General of Israel there. It was terrific, I think. So, and what is interesting, like we discussed yesterday, now it's becoming a natural part of the agendas. It's not kind of bureaucratic request of the diplomats. They are now searching for the ways to build those relationships. For me, this is also important because we had a long history of, you know, community building in Lithuania. We've been living, you know, in all those shtetls, you know, together. We've been learning and we've been inspiring each other. That connection is lost. We have to reestablish. Let's start from America, if that's not always possible in Lithuania, because, well, here we have all the possibilities. We are living together, but we're not communicating. So I'm glad that it started. On national level, well, I'm also quite happy that, you know, from 2011, all those years together with Ambassador Derse, we've been working hard in making it positive, in trying to get all the governmental institutions more strategic, more visionary, trying to put all the actions together and, you know, great results. Well, 2011, the whole year was dedicated for Holocaust remembrance. In 2011, we had this historic vote on the bill, you know, on symbolic financial compensation for Jewish communal properties lost. I say it's symbolic, but what I liked the most, it was a political vote. From the left to the right, it was more or less unanimous vote. We have to do it. That's a political obligation. Then we had 2013, year of Vilnius ghetto liquidation. We had also a lot of events. Why I'm stressing it, I liked what we achieved, but I think what is lacking and what we have to do, we have to continue being strategic in Lithuania. We have a lot of money, by the way. We are part of EU. We have structural funds. We are, you know, we are fastest growing economy and so on. But we are still sometimes more reactive, more chaotic than necessary. We can do it. It's not always about money, actually. It's about vision, will, priority, strategy. And I really dream about kind of, you know, 2011, like a year when we had a program, we have all governmental institutions knowing what we have to do. Each embassy had some kind of little vision and little plan, and we did it in 2011. I hope we will come back to it. I'm really, I'm discussing it with my Prime Minister. Maybe we will try to do it, because that should be a long-term plan. It should be, for decades to run, and I think we can do it. And last kind of level, it's international. Well, from the days when I was chairing kind of community of democracy, when we've been sitting together with diplomats from Israel, I felt so much at home and together, because, we are frontiers of democracy and freedom. We feel the same tensions, and tensions are actually growing, not going down. We have to stick together. We have the whole past together. We have all difficult pages of it. But the world is not getting better. It's getting worse. And starting from inside, we discussed it also yesterday, radicalization of societies. We have new and new things emerging and popping up in our countries, in Europe, especially after financial crisis. We have, phenomenon of memory losing. World is going commercial, and it's about money more than about memory, and it's dangerous. It's a dangerous mix. During Soviet time, our memory was deleted, but now with those new liberal tendencies, people do not think. They just, they just watch TV or do something else, and that's dangerous in situations when you don't think and challenges are growing from inside, but also from outside. Look to what is happening today in Ukraine, where we have to stay together and help each other. Look what is happening in the region around around Israel. It's also about situation in America. You have a lot of internal debates, and it's not always United States will be able to keep an eye on things important to us. It's also about our own responsibility in the Middle East, in Europe's East. Can we do it better? Can we do it together? Like a diplomat, from the first day I arrived to Israel, I said to myself that we are part of Friends of Israel group for very different reasons, and we have to stay like this. We have to work together, and it's a whole world in front of us, with my minister also joining today's Security Council. So to summarize it all, on human, kind of people-to-people level, on community level, on national level, on international level, we have real work to do. And I see YIVO, when you asked yesterday what's the place and what's the sense, I see YIVO actually as the focus point of all those strategies, if you want, because you are part of us, you are part of that lost identity. Yeah. And if we make it regular, once per year, if we strategize here together with Lithuanians coming from everywhere, not only from Washington, from Vilnius, Brussels, let's review the progress, but let's be strategic. Let's think ahead. Let's make it positive. A lot of things, a lot of challenges, a lot of failures, but let's do it. I'm happy that today Lithuanian American community from New York is represented by a young person somewhere. I don't see him. It's a lot of light here. But, young generation is here of Lithuanian Americans. They're listening, and they're very open. They're creative. They want to do it together. So let's think how to make it work. So thank you.
And now it is a really great pleasure to introduce someone who is a wonderful statesman, someone who is a dear friend, someone who had a tremendous, tremendous influence on the course of Lithuanian Jewish relations in Lithuania during her tenure as ambassador, Ambassador Anne E. Dursey.
Okay. Well, good morning. First of all, let me say thank you for coming out despite the exigencies of the weather. It's a great honor for me to be here with all of you, with my friend Jonathan Brent at YIVO, and with such a distinguished panel of speakers this morning. I was the U.S. ambassador in Lithuania from 2009 to 2012, and during that period, encouraging and supporting Lithuania's efforts to address the legacy of the Holocaust was a very big focus of the US government and the US Embassy's activity. And this was true for a number of reasons. First of all, there were issues, important issues of historical justice to be dealt with. And that included looking at issues of property, compensation for property that had been stolen, commemorating, appropriately memorializing killing sites, and the restoration of cemeteries that had been pillaged or destroyed. All of these things were important to address issues from the past. But equally important, the US government was very concerned about issues of the future. In the interest of never again, we believed that Lithuania's history, which, as the title of this conference today reflects, the unresolved issues of Lithuania's history need to be addressed for the future. The lessons of the Holocaust and the tragedies that occurred need to be taken, analyzed. The facts, the historical facts, very importantly, need to be brought out, analyzed, and pushed into the public realm and public debate so that lessons can be learned, and not just in Lithuania, but in the world, for the United States, for Europe, for Africa, for the whole world. Those lessons can be applied and ensure that a tragedy like this never happens again. So we worked also on issues related to historical analysis, and we worked on Holocaust education. And as I got more deeply into these issues, I learned with great humility that the history is incredibly sensitive and incredibly complicated. And it's very important that we sit together and look at it respectfully. Lithuania, in the years I was in Lithuania, went through a kind of a watershed, however, a watershed that promises an opportunity and a challenge. And that was, in 2011, Lithuania marked 20 years of independence. And you have a generation now that has grown up in Lithuania, in a free Lithuania, in a democratic Lithuania, and a Lithuania that is a member of the European Union. And you have a generation of people who can look at these issues differently than those who experienced them. As I delved into the history, I learned with humility that Lithuania's tragic history of 3 occupations, Soviet, Nazi, Soviet, and then 50 years of Soviet occupation in which history was basically erased or repressed, as Jonathan and Ambassador Pavlionis mentioned, had left a void, a black hole, as I saw it, in which many narratives have grown up, some based on fact, some not, but very hard-held, very deeply felt on the part of many people. And somehow, we have to sit down together and look at the facts and look at the narratives and find a way to reconcile this history so that lessons can be taken that will inform our actions in the future. And I believe that this is the crucial next step to be taken for the future, is to continue the work on historical analysis and research, bringing that information, very importantly, bringing it into the public realm, into public discussion and debate, as difficult as it will be and as sensitive as it will be. And in this respect, I'd like to applaud and thank YIVO for being a forum that provides the opportunity for discussion on these issues. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the eminent panel of discussants today. They all have enormous intellectual courage and deep historical experience. So I hope this will be the beginning of what may, as Ambassador Pavlionis said, be a continuing discussion. And I hope that YIVO will continue its great commitment and contribution to the effort. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Okay.
Now, it's my real great pleasure to introduce the panel, and I would like the panelists, please, to come up. We are really honored to have so many distinguished people with us today. Leonidas Donskis is a member of the European Parliament 2009 to 2014. He has written and edited over 30 books, 15 of them in English. His writing combines political theory, history of ideas, philosophy of culture, philosophy of literature, and essayistic style. His works originally were written in Lithuanian and English and have been translated into 15 languages. Donskis is a visiting professor of politics at Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas, Lithuania, and holds an honorary degree of Doctor of Letters from the University of Bradford in Great Britain. Leonidas. Mikhail Iossel, who will be our moderator, is professor of English at Concordia University and founder and executive program director of the Summer Literary Seminars, SLS, one of our co-sponsors today, one of the world's most innovative and dynamic international literary conferences. The Soviet-born Iossel is a writer, teacher, recipient of the NEA and Guggenheim Foundation fellowships. His stories and essays have been published in literary magazines in the US and abroad and translated into several foreign languages. Faina Kukliansky, who it has been my privilege to know for the last 3 years since I've been going back and forth to Vilnius, and has been, and aside from her biographical credentials, has been a great force in helping the YIVO Institute and facilitating relations between the Litvak and Lithuanian communities. Faina is chairperson of the Jewish Litvak Community of Lithuania. She is an advocate and chairperson of the Jewish Community of Vilnius. Faina has been a practicing lawyer and arbiter since 1977 and is a member of several Lithuanian and international law associations and Jewish organizations. After the restoration of Lithuanian independence, she was elected as a member of the first board of the Jewish Community of Lithuania. Later, she became active as a lawyer representing Jewish communities of Lithuania. In 2013, she was elected chair of the Jewish Community of Lithuania. Saulius Sužiedėlis is professor of history, emeritus at Millersville University of Pennsylvania. From 1982 to 1987, he worked as a research historian for the U.S. Department of Justice, and during 1989-1990 worked as a radio journalist and commentator for Voice of America. Professor Sužiedėlis is author of a number of scholarly books and articles on Lithuanian history. Sužiedėlis and has published both in the United States and in Lithuania. Since 1998, he has been a member of the International Commission for the Evaluation of the Crimes of the Nazi and Soviet occupation regimes in Lithuania. Between 2007 and 2010, he served as director of Millersville University's annual conference on the Holocaust and Genocide, and in 2013, Professor Sužiedėlis was awarded an honorary doctorate from Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas in recognition of his work in furthering the study of humanities for contributions to Holocaust research. He is one of the sanest, most rational, and balanced and judicious voices in all of the controversies that have been raging over the Holocaust in Lithuania. So it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you. Please come up.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for the panel members for the participation. And let me just start off with a very simple question. What's unresolved about this history? What are the unresolved parts of it? And why has it not been resolved yet? What's keeping it from being resolved? Because the broad outlines of this history are universally known and are not in dispute, really. Right? I mean, just a small Eastern European nation at the very heart, in the very heart of East Central Europe, has a fairly sizable Jewish population, percentage-wise to the ethnic majority population, and those two communities live side by side without tremendous overlap and without too much friendliness and without intermingling necessarily, but in mutual respectable terms. And then something happens, and then the day before the Nazis roll into Lithuania, the killings of Jews start. And when it's all said and done, instead of 2,000, 20,000 people, Litvaks, there are several thousand left. So 95% have been exterminated, which is likely the highest percentage in Europe. And then 60 years of radio silence of the Soviet rule follow. In the Soviet Union, Holocaust was not discussed or acknowledged. And then Lithuania becomes independent in 91, and that's when the turbulence on this issue begins. So that's what I would like to propose to start with. the unresolved parts of this history, and why unresolved? Anybody, just...
Well, is this working? Yes. Yes, okay. You know, the very title, Unresolved History, as a professional historian, gives me a little pause because it suggests that there will be such a thing. It's not working. Is it working? It's working now? Okay, it's working now? Is it working now? Sorry about this. Oh, I can hear myself, yes. What I wanted to say was that the title, Unresolved History, unfortunately, from a professional historian's point of view, suggests that there's such a thing as resolved history. And I find that somewhat problematic because history is not the past. It's an evolving narrative about the past. And in professional terms, what it means is that it's an evolving narrative based on historians getting together and observing certain rules of evidence, categorizing the sources in different ways, and producing, as close as they can, an image of past events which approximates what happened, as complicated as that past might be. And so I think a better way to look at it is what is unresolved is coming to terms with that history and coming to terms with this evolving narrative by various communities, which for a long time have held certain notions, ironclad notions about what had happened, based primarily, I think, until 1990, 91, 92, on basically Western narratives, Israeli narratives, and so on. That has changed to a good extent in the last 20 years, considerably, with the access with the opening of archives that before had been closed. And so that's what I would like to talk about, this evolving narrative and how that works. And that creates problems. It creates social problems, it creates political problems, it creates public controversies, and so on. So I would suggest that when we talk about the unresolved history, we keep that in mind. But I would defer to my colleague Leonidas to talk about, I think, the broader social reactions to that history, as he is involved in the political sphere far more than I am.
Well, I would say that, in fact, 24 years that passed since the collapse of the Soviet Union was a critical time, a pivotally important time for Lithuania, and well, I had a possibility to observe many things in the capacity of Lithuanian as a son of a Holocaust survivor, as an academic, and finally as someone who is in the shoes of a policymaker in Brussels. So I tried my very best to understand what happened to my country over the past 24 years. And I have to say that one of the most important things was that in 1991, I still remember myself, during any kind of public debate in Lithuania, there was a shock, an immediate shock after mentioning the Holocaust as something related to Lithuanians and Lithuania. People were absolutely convinced, including quite educated segments of society, that it was something related to the Nazis, like communism was related to Russians, and Lithuania was just a victim. So that was a story told almost every day, and people took it for granted that Lithuania, like any other East European country, was a victim of those regimes that overlapped and that simply made Lithuania sort of interchangeable space in terms of ideological and murderous regimes. But only then people started remembering some controversies that occurred among emigres. And I regret that my friend, as beloved, as close as Saulius, Tomas Venclova, was unable to make it. Tomas Venclova seems to have been the first Lithuanian voice in the world, the first writer, poet, and Soviet dissident who said it openly, who just put it black and white, that we were guilty. We were guilty, we kept silent for a long time, and the fact remains that there is a horrible crime behind our history. In his essay, The Jews and the Lithuanians, published in Israel and then translated into Lithuanian, Thomas wrote this in Russian and had it published in Russian in Israel, and then one of the most liberal monthlies among emigres, Akirache, Horizons, got it translated and published in Chicago. And I remember that several very liberal voices among emigres, including my mentor and friend Vytautas Kavolis, Liūtas Mockūnas, or Algirdas Julius Greimas in Paris, they said that they could have signed after every single word of Thomas Venclova. But Thomas Venclova remained a lonely voice, and due to some political reasons, I have to say, Polonophobes disliked Thomas for his liberal approach to Poland, anti-Semites disliked him for being too liberal to the Jews, and Russophobes disliked Thomas for being too liberal to Russians. So meaning that he was regarded as a cosmopolitan and isolated voice in Lithuania. But what happened in the 90s was that people started remembering Thomas as far more provocative, influential, and promising voices than it appeared in the 70s. So, and I have to say that, to put it in several points, what happened to Lithuania was shock after the discovery that Lithuania was related to the Holocaust. Then, of course, it was much defense, a very defensive attitude, saying that we were just victims. And I have to say that, again, people like Saulius Sužiedėlis, professors among emigres, or West European and North American professors, who used to come to Lithuania, they sounded, I would say, not in tune with the official narrative in those days. Things started changing in the late 90s, and especially when Lithuania became a member of the EU, not because some miraculous forces changed Lithuania overnight. No, it didn't happen. We still have many conflicting opinions, and Lithuania has many, many painful problems. I do believe that what happened during the Second World War poisoned the relations between Jews, their offspring, and Lithuanians. It poisoned the relations. And we were deprived of our sensitivity, human sensitivity, and it was really a devilish force of the 20th century that confined Lithuania to sort of very justificatory and very selfish interpretation of history. But what was happening was a logical outcome of the coming of new generations, more educated, more liberal-minded, more open-spirited. And look, I remember, had it been in 1992, 1995, Saulius will not allow me to lie, so I would have expected some 3, 5, 7 persons to sign a petition saying that you have to do something about it, meaning a petition or an open letter to the government. Well, what happened was that a year ago, when there was a very controversial thing, the reinternment of the former head of the provisional government of Lithuania, Ambrazevičius Brazaitis, we understood immediately that we had to react, because that was really outrageous. And normally, had it been in the 90s, I would have expected some 5, 7 voices. We got 40 signatures, including young people whom I didn't know. Even myself, an educator, didn't know some young people who signed the petition without reservations. So this allows me to say that, in fact, something started changing, and that's why I would say that our political class will be pressurized by those segments of Lithuanian society. Of course, I have to mention some wonderful things done by diplomats. Our ambassador, Darius Degutis, in Israel, whose work deserves praise and admiration, indeed. Our diplomats who did their utmost, sometimes becoming an object of, I would say, even misguided criticism, because the messenger was killed in some cases. But I think that in addition to diplomats, something has to be done about our political class. We're still suffering from lack of moral and political leadership in Lithuania. And I do believe that the time should come for our politicians, in addition to very enlightened and very courageous people like Minister Linkevičius or our other ambassadors, whose work I really admire. I have to imagine people in the position of Prime Minister, President of the country, speaking louder, much louder. Every 16th of February, when we have neo-Nazis parading and marching and spoiling a wonderful day of Lithuania, the Independence Day. Every 11th of March, the day of restoration of independence of Lithuania, when we have, those xenophobes, racists, anti-Semites parading as if to say that this is their march, So we have to hear a much stronger voice. And I think that lack of moral and political leadership sometimes is especially that kind of void that was mentioned by Ambassador Darcy. It's a void created by clashing narratives. It's a void created by 5 decades of the erosion of memory. That's why people are sometimes shocked by something that would be a banality in the West. Banal facts for West Europeans, if they don't happen to be anti-Semites in Sweden or Denmark or Norway or in America, they know for sure that this is a crime against humanity and crime against Jewish people. And yet those things come as an eye-opener, as something shocking, which still says how far our educational system is from achieving the pivotal goals.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that?
Can you hear me? Yes. Not too much. I think the prelegents gave very good comments, but the Jewish community would say that the shock still continues sometimes. It wasn't finished in the 90s. It's quite a big part of the society still does not believe or do not want to believe what happened. And, you know, we have a lot what to do in the future to persuade them not to be in a shock, but to realize, to understand what happened. By the way, it's not a case then we are sitting and waiting somebody to ask us to forgive. This is less what we need. We need to realize, to understand, to teach the future generations, to debate it, and that really what we expect from the society, and not only from the society, but from the politicians who are getting salaries for that.
Well, so why the lack of moral courage on the part of the politicians? What's at stake for them? So the loss of a political career, so political death, which is not the equivalent of actual death. Where does this pressure come from to suppress certain kinds of narrative? Where does it originate? Just a very brief sort of like tangential discourse. You know, I grew up in the Soviet Union, in Leningrad, USSR. And Lithuania was kind of, was set apart from most other Soviet republics in that probably, among many other things like basketball, but that probably out of the 10 most famous movie stars, male movie stars in the Soviet Union, were Lithuanians. Budraitis, Banionis, Adamaitis, right? Masiulis, and so forth. Just very kind of manly, big featured faces that are stony on the screen and so forth. So just very... and of course, the most popular, the definitive film, right, movie by Jalakevich's of that era was Nikto ne khatel umirat, Nobody Wanted to Die, right, which basically was a breakthrough for Lithuanian theater. It was a breakthrough for Soviet cinema, right, in 1964. I was very little at the time, but it kept being shown in the 70s and in the 80s and so forth, and that's where all this, you know, Lithuania was resistance to Stalinism continued, to Soviet occupation continued, and that was the only republic that continued its resistance for its brothers, right, for many years after the war. And so those were the heroic partisans, right, LAF members and so forth, who it just was, develops later were the same people who started killing the Jews. So if you eliminate them as, or if you dethrone them as heroes, then there is a deheroization of society in a way. So then by eliminating one strand of narrative, you basically eliminate the whole narrative. Am I correct in this, Leonidas? Or?
I will try to address some political aspects of this, because I would rely on Professor Sužiedėlis as an expert of history, and I can only talk about some political, social implications. And yes, of course, I believe that what happened was that a sort of danger that came from the Western narratives, from Western historical and political narratives, and those narratives threatened the heroic narrative of Lithuania. People firmly believed that all forest brethren were heroes. They firmly believed that all partisans. And of course, we understand that the picture was very complex and very difficult. Like in every war, there are people who are really idealists, patriots and heroes, and there are some people who can commit war crimes, and which was very much the case with Forest Brothers. Some of them were young people in their teens, they must have been 18, 20, and many people died out of romantic and passionate love for their country. But of course, there were people from LAF, Lithuanian Activist Front, who started killing the Jews, who started fueling hatred in Kaunas. And I believe that instead of trying to understand the complexity, the disturbing complexity of this process, many people were tempted to paint it black and white. Either we have our heroes, and then don't steal our heroes from us, or just try to understand the specificity of a country which was suffering the most. But in fact, now we start understanding that it was a very complex picture. Among this same structure of people, there were people who saved Jewish lives, and there were people who were trying to kill them. We know that families were split. Among righteous Gentiles, there were their family members who were poisonous, toxic anti-Semites. And I think that the problem, dear Mikhail, to try to answer your very complex question would be that something very human, something that is very similar to processes that were in Germany, where children defend their parents. It's a generational problem. And we know that not a few people, but there are many people who are quite prominent in Lithuania. Their parents were either in the provisional government, or they were quite prominent among, people who were very patriotic. And I can understand that they're trying to buy the story of their family, as if to say that people must have been confused, shocked by many things, but unable to do anything about it. And it creates a very difficult dilemma. I wish Lithuania would be strong enough to solve it, but it would be very difficult for any country. On the one side, the Soviet occupation, then the uprising, which is fair and legitimate enough. How can you not to uprise against the occupying force when you can't do it? But then part of this force becomes absolutely anti-Semitic, adopts the Goebbels propaganda. And we know that during the first appeal to the public, Leonidas Donskis, the radiophonist of Kaunas, he offered a poisonous speech, an absolutely anti-Semitic speech full of hatred. And praise of the LAF, Lithuanian Activist Front, has very unpleasant undertones. I couldn't agree more with this, and I have to say that it's a very difficult thing. We have to distinguish very clearly between people who save Jewish lives. Yes, we know that people save Jewish lives, but at the same time, some family members were very far from it, and families were split. And I know the stories about how in small Lithuanian towns, one brother was a white ribbon killing the Jews, another, his brother, was a Catholic priest saving the lives of Jews. Well, and Lithuania, I think, is very special due to the degree of tragic and dramatic appeal of this part of history. Another problem is, I guess, that some people think that the Holocaust undermines the heroic history of the Second World War. But then the question is, who are our heroes? Is our hero Leonidas Donskis, or is our hero Sofija Binkienė, who saved Jewish lives, the wife of Kazys Binkis, a wonderful Lithuanian poet? Who are our heroes? And we have to do something to try to identify our heroes. For me, my heroes during the Second World War would be Professor Landsbergis' mother, who saved a Jewish girl. My heroes would be the righteous Gentiles, ethnic Lithuanians who saved their lives. My friend, my deceased friend, who was a famous emigre political scientist, a British and American political science professor, Aleksandras Stromas, he was saved by a Lithuanian family of Antanas and Marija Macanavičius, and they didn't receive anything from him. No money, nothing, just saved him. And when, after the Second World War, Alex Stromas asked them, why did they do this? The answer was, look, we were really afraid of white ribbons. We were really scared by the Nazis, but we were more afraid of God. So in a way, this semi-literate family repeated the phrase of Chiune Sugihara, a famous Japanese diplomat who said, Yes, I did disobey my government, but if I obeyed my government, I would have disobeyed God. So that was Sugihara who said this. Funny enough, they repeated that phrase.
I should add, to make it more complicated than you just did about the Landsbergis affair, is yes, the mother did save Jews. Let's remember that the father was a member of that provisional government, so it gets complicated. I think in terms of politics, I should say this, that repeating, the film Casablanca, Captain Renault says, shocked to find gambling. We shouldn't be shocked to find that moral courage and politics somehow doesn't go together. And I think the thing is that there's one simple reason that I know is that there's no political reward for getting into this issue among Lithuanians. And I can tell you, for example, when I would go in audiences and speak, I would say something that is resolved history, because you can't question this. And I would tell them that the summer of 1941 was the bloodiest period in the modern history of the country, particularly the period between early August and late October. No mass murder has occurred like this in the country's history. And that fact alone, which is unchallengeable, would, in the audience, reflect a kind of sometimes anger, sometimes disappointment, sometimes shock, but displeasure certainly. And so you see that for a politician to go out there and get involved in the issue of, for example, telling people to confront Holocaust history has no political rewards. The other part of the politics, and you know more about this than I do in some sense, is that there are certain, particularly right-wing groups and so on, which would raise a lot of noise on this issue, and no politician wants noise, particularly in an election year. So there are some reasons why the politicians find, I agree that I thirst for a political voice of moral authority, and I think many people would like to have someone lead them, for example, in a counter-demonstration to the people who go and disgrace the holidays of February 16th and March 11th. And I think that is the main political, social problem in terms of confronting this on that societal level. I think, on the other hand, as far as the study of history is concerned in the country, I think that's going to evolving in a totally healthy direction, and it's going to take care of itself. I don't understand the concept of defending history, because what are you defending? History is a narrative, it evolves. The main academic institutions in the country actually do now follow the Western rules of evidence of a liberal democratic society. I think the more extreme members of the historical profession have been successfully marginalized to a large extent, particularly since the late 1990s, especially. And so that will take care of itself. The more important problem is how the society comes to terms with the history that is going to be presented to it. And I should add one final point, is that the reason this is an evolving narrative in particular is that those archives, which have been open since the late 1980s actually, contain, by my estimation, close to 1 million pages of Lithuanian language documents of local authorities during the German occupation. None of these sources has ever been used in any of the studies up to that time. And it does change the picture considerably. It makes it more nuanced in some cases, makes it bloodier in some instances, makes it more horrific. I always laugh when I hear, no one in the West would think of taking seriously a monograph about Vichy France written by a scholar who knew no French and couldn't work in French archives. But unfortunately, until the early 90s, that was the situation in studying the Lithuanian Holocaust from the Western perspective. That has changed now, because the number of publications dealing with Holocaust issues, articles about robbery, of looting of property, which is a very understudied yet aspect of this history, I'd say now there are at least several hundred good bibliographic positions in Lithuanian language, including monographs and peer-reviewed articles. I mean, I'm talking about the serious stuff, not necessarily newspaper items and so on, which have delved into a lot of what happens on the local level in terms of how the genocide began, how the decision was made to implement it, and what were the stages of the killing process. Let's remember that by early August 1941, 95% of Lithuania's Jews were still alive, persecuted, but living. By late October of 1941, after the bloodiest day in the history of modern Lithuania, October 29th in Kaunas, 2/3 of the community was dead. So this killing occurred in a very concentrated spasm of violence, which required organization, premeditation, certain structural sort of context, which I think is being successfully investigated. But just to finish my point, I think the real problem in terms of the society at large, despite still the efforts of, and I applaud people who do Holocaust education, they do the tolerance centers and so on, is quite good. But we still have problems in textbooks, and we have problems of political courage by the political class, which refuses to go out and publicly put down and marginalize those people who would like to wave certain symbols in their demonstrations. Anyway, that's just a thought.
Nothing too much to add.
Well, then maybe, what would you like to address first and foremost? If you had your absolute must list and the president of the country were listening and the whole media of the country were listening, what would you say to them? What would be the first order of business?
So, first of all, if I may say a few words, I'm so happy that I'm invited here to YIVO institution, which was founded in Vilnius. Secondly, I'm very sorry that I'm sitting with that boots because it's a terrible weather and I have to leave and I feel myself very awkward. Third thing, what I would like to say, unresolved history or resolved history, it's really not my topic. I like history and I'm interested in it, but I'm not a specialist and I'm not going to discuss now with real specialists which devoted their life for the researchers. I think that you should be interested in another question. How does the Jewish community stay in Lithuania after that what happened? And I think a lot of you would have this question. And I would also, continuing this shock of 90s, I would tell you, I don't know if you know, but one of the first law which was passed in Lithuania was the law of derehabilitation of the people who were sentenced by so-called troikas. So Lithuania did not accept these troikas as a legal system. And the people were rehabilitated. It was not amnestia. Then somebody says, yes, you did the crime, but today you are, the government says that you are not guilty anymore. No, it was rehabilitation. That meant that the government told that these people never did a crime and that they were sentenced not in the right way. Among these people, as far as I know, there were people who actively took part in the mass murdering, and Saulius knows that story very well, and I don't know why even in Lithuania we are not talking that 20 years after that took the process of derehabilitation. It was a special investigation department in the public prosecutor department which analyzed all these cases and once more applied to the court to decide if one or another guilty person is guilty or not. So, but starting talking about the 90s, I think that was the last Aliyah who left Lithuania. And this law on rehabilitation could be one of the reasons why the last people left Lithuania, Jews, I mean. Today we have the situation, then the Lithuanians are leaving Lithuania. Jews are not living anymore. Jews feel themselves quite safe in Lithuania. So I think for us this is the biggest question, and this is a question for me myself. I'm also a daughter of survivors. All of my family was killed. My parents were children. Part of my family was saved by Lithuanians, and they hid it in the forest for 3 years. And, you know, I have this pain in my heart, and I'll have it forever. Therefore, I do not ask anybody to ask me to forgive. I'll never forgive if you ask me as a person. But as a leader of the Jewish community, then somebody asked me how Jews can live in Lithuania, where all the Jews were killed. I can ask the Jews live in Germany, the Jews live in Austria, the Jews live all over the world, and it's a really philosophical and ideological question. How do you see the place of the Jews in Lithuania? How do you see their future? What do you do for the Jewish community to feel comfortable? How do you integrate this community into the society? What are the relationships with other sensitive minorities, which Ambassador Dorsey knows very well, that we have a human rights coalition with other minorities, and we support each other. So I would say that without past can't be the future, but I think that the historians will spend a lot of time discussing and investigating the documents, the new documents, and we live today. You are talking about the young generation. Perhaps I'm the old generation, but I'm still alive. And I still think that even for my generation is some better future in the society, and I feel that I myself, even though I was born in the Soviet time and grew up in the Soviet time, I can give a lot of positive experience to the entire society. So generally that's it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, history takes care of itself, of course, because it doesn't even know it exists, you know, and it exists in a very different time continuum than, look at what happened in Russia. It can take a very long roundabout route, right? It can take, and in all these post-Soviet societies, after a period of initial elation, basically the period of reaction sets in, and Russia is just harsher than in most other places. A very vivid lesson of what happens if you do not take care, for instance, of your past. The past will come back and bite you because it was not eliminated. The KGB was not eliminated, so it came back roaring. And so I still am kind of, let me just, I organize literary programs and cultural programs in different places. In Lithuania, it's an important place for me. I must tell you that and we bring some very prominent Jewish, non-Jewish writers. Some very famous Jewish American writers said, we'll go with you wherever. They went with us to St. Petersburg, they will go to us again, we won't go to Lithuania. We just won't. And I said, well, why? Well, you know why. Okay, and actually it doesn't make any sense to pry. What needs to happen that the world would stop to perceive Lithuania as a place that has not yet come to grips fully with the atrocity of its past? I mean, of course Jews live everywhere. They live in Germany, but Germany has dealt with its past very differently. Yeah.
I will try to address this very difficult issue. So I think that, again, since I feel very strongly both as a son of a Holocaust survivor and a son of a Lithuanian, and as a Lithuanian in the sense of my very deep commitment to my country. So of course, these iniquities pain me the most, and I would strongly agree with those thinkers who say that the way that a European Jew can identify his or her patriotism is that anti-Semitism elsewhere doesn't hurt me, but it hurts me in my country. So meaning that iniquities of my country pain me the most. But even so, I have to say that Lithuania doesn't deserve such an attitude, meaning that you have to dismiss the country as a whole because it doesn't deserve it. We have very honest and very enlightened people among diplomats, culture people, who did their utmost, sometimes going against the current. And let me tell you some stories which would tell how difficult it is. It's much more difficult than I thought. Over the past years, we had some literary pieces written by young writers, and quite prominent ones, like Daiva Čepauskaitė, who wrote The Whole, and Sigitas Parulskis, a really noted Lithuanian writer who wrote his Darkness and Company, his novel, which I reviewed. And I have to say that it's a piece of wonderful literary work. And the story that Sigitas, who happens to be my friend, Sigitas, when he told me the story, how much he was scorned and attacked by his fellow sisters and brothers in literature, so to say, tells something that, yes, it's very difficult for Lithuanians who decide to raise their voices in defense of the truth. So they could be at risk of being singled out or marginalized or dismissed. It's very difficult. And the same happens almost everywhere, that people need to have the guts. They need to have courage. It's quite difficult. And the image that Lithuania, much to my regret, has concerning the failure to come to terms with history, I think it is partly related to the fact that we didn't have people like Willy Brandt. Germany had Willy Brandt, who kneeled in Warsaw, before the Warsaw Ghetto, and in Yad Vashem, in Israel. And everybody understood that that was a groundbreaking action in political history of Germany, and Europe, I have to say. Because to follow the Hobbesian principle of the state, that state is always right, no matter what happens, that was an anti-Hobbesian action. And a kneeling leader of the state asking for forgiveness. It didn't happen elsewhere. It happened in Germany. And what we needed the most was a politician or a group of politicians who would have done something similar. It didn't happen, and I agree with Saulius very strongly that we lacked the courage at this point. At the same time, there are very intelligent and courageous policymakers. I mentioned diplomats already because it's a different ball game for diplomats, so they do their job in a very professional way. If they happen to be as intelligent and kind as Ambassador Pavilionis or Ambassador Degutis in Israel, things are getting done. Things are getting done. But what is problematic is that in Lithuania there was a big failure in terms of stopping mainstreaming some ugly tendencies in politics. People with very far-right views on Jews, on Roma, on whatever you want, they got very close to the power centers in Lithuanian politics. Instead of marginalizing them, we mainstream them. These people are mainstream, and this is a problem. And when it comes to the elections, people have to go to the public saying the truth. But then I was told many times, but look, I will lose the election. And I said, lose it, at least once. But you will set a lesson. Politics is not about longevity. Politics is about the efficacious truth, as Machiavelli said. Not in the Machiavellian context of thought, but I would say that, rephrasing the whole thing, establish a decent practice. Establish a good practice, and you will be remembered for what you got done.
Yeah, but also, absolutely. But also, don't you think that, by the way, I have to say that I've been doing this program there in Lithuania for 5 years. I think, and people who participate in the program, we think positive changes. Something changed over the last 2 years in particular. It's just some kind of small but decided quantum leap has been taken. It feels different. It feels somehow different, more energetic, more forward bound, somehow. I don't know how to put it in words necessarily. But also, don't you think that the way people vote, the way people think about themselves and their lives is to a large extent function of their economic condition? And when there is a period of economic hardship in the country, as almost always in the post-Soviet countries, people revert to their worst selves, basically, somehow, or harsher selves in a way. And it's hard to expect them to make enlightened choices in politics, somehow, that they will vote for populists, basically.
I would disagree to some extent, because I do accept the notion that economic hardship and the crisis, and particularly in the post-Soviet space, is a good soil for radicalism in various populists to come up and demagogue almost every issue. However, even in the absence of that economic problem, we would still have an issue. And we still come back to the fundamental question of how to confront the history. And one of the problems that I didn't mention that I should is that, and most people don't realize, I think in the West especially, is that there's a practical problem. the German occupation for ethnic Lithuanians was not the most terrible experience of their lives, by far. A few thousand people were killed by the Nazis, ethnic Lithuanians. In general, the conditions were not as bad as certainly under other occupations. The most terrible period for ethnic Lithuanians was the period that began with the end of the war, not the beginning. From 45 to 50, at least 10 times more Lithuanians were killed than during the German occupation or during 40-41. And this conditions how people remember the past. So you go to a village. In fact, my family also experienced this post-war. In my father's cemetery, my grandparents' cemetery, there are people buried who were killed on May 8th, 1945, while all of Europe celebrated. They were murdered, including a 4-month-old little boy called Tadeusz. Now, for these people, the memory of horror for them is not the German occupation. And so what you have to do, how can I build empathy within these people to say, look, but there were all these hundreds of thousands of fellow citizens that you had, and they're gone, and shouldn't you become more interested in their fate and try to read more about that past? And I think that's where the problem, in our particular issue that we're discussing today, that is a huge obstacle. It's not insurmountable, I don't think, with the proper effort, but it's an obstacle that I think most people in the West never think about. And in Estonia, it's even more dramatic. An Estonian person does not have to be, I mean, he knows perfectly well statistically that for ethnic Estonians, the Soviet occupation was far worse than the German occupation. And therefore, that whole issue of the bronze statue, I perfectly understand their feelings about it. So, I mean, we have to consider that. Now, on the other hand, one doesn't want to say, okay, you guys suffered a lot, so therefore you're victims, and you thus must evade the responsibility of confronting the fact that people of your ethnicity, your language, and your culture actually committed mass murder. See, and now how to go from that to that conversation isn't always easy. I'm going to say it's not impossible, but it takes a special kind of effort. And I think in that kind of audience that I've worked with, I find out that being a Lithuanian speaker, and they tend to listen to their own more. Just a human tendency, and therefore they'll give me a little bit more credibility, perhaps. So, but it's not an easy thing. I've had lectures. People come up afterwards and say, "Well, you have told us about the atrocities our people committed against the Jews, but don't you know who greeted the Soviets in 1940?" And you get the same song and dance. And for the older people, you're not going to convince them. But for younger people, there is some hope. I know my friend Vytautas Toleikas has 93 people in his gymnasium in Vilnius that he took a survey of. Very interesting. A survey how they feel about other minorities. Unfortunately, most of these high schoolers did not like the Roma. But in terms of Jews, about 65 of the 93, the numbers are on Facebook, I don't, said, well, we like them. You would never have this kind of conversation with people over the age of 60. I mean, it's a different world, and even more in the historical profession, we have a change of generations that is now changing, I think, even more rapidly than before, and that is reflected in the scholarship and people who have studied in the West and have gone to German archives as well as Lithuanian ones, and so there is a normal group of historical professionals aged between 30 and 50 that's becoming prominent in the major academic institutions and universities, and that gives me hope. But we still have to overcome these obstacles, and it's a tall order. But my feeling always is that, regardless of whether you think you're going to fail or succeed, you have to give it a shot. So I think that's the only way to look at it.
If I may, I would say honestly, if anybody asked me about something really existential in terms of challenges to my country, I would say that that's education. We have to do something about it because really it calls for a very radical reform. It's simply unpardonable that, the Holocaust is confined to 1 or 2 pages in textbooks. It's simply unpardonable that this entire saga of Jewish life in Lithuania, which made Lithuania so rich, immensely rich in Europe, is confined to several pages, sometimes without mentioning that the Lithuanian Jews, some of them were Lithuanian patriots and heroes, 3,000 volunteers who defended Lithuania in 1918. So in Lithuanian perception, sometimes it just happens that a Jew should have been a shtetl dweller with nothing in common with the Lithuanian state. It's a parallel reality, so to say. It's nonsense. The role of Jews in businesses, in international connections, in promotion of the state, the role of people like Jacob Robinson, Jokūbas Robinsonas, the role of, for instance, people like Alex Stromas' father, Jurgis Stromas, who was killed in the Lietuva garage massacre, and who was chargé d'affaires in Berlin for some time. They were patriots of Lithuania. And these 3,000 Jews of Lithuania who had their rabbis who blessed them before skirmishes, along with Catholic priests who worked with ethnic Lithuanians. So how can this be relegated to the margins of history? How can we forget that Lithuania gave to the world the most prominent Parisian painters? That Lithuania gave to the world Emmanuel Levinas, the French ethicist #1 who was born in Kaunas, who spoke Yiddish, Russian, Lithuanian, then French, German. So how can we forget the circle of Amadeo Modigliani with Chaim Soutine, with Jacques Lipschitz, with Michel Kequin, with Pingus Kremen. So Bernard Berenson, after whose person and work a Harvard Art School is named, who was born in the same shtetl where my father was born, Butrimans or Butrimonis in Lithuania. So how can we relegate this to the margin? So we have to do something about education. We cannot restore the past. We cannot restore the lives of people who were killed, but we have to do something about history. We have to embrace our history, making Lithuania more just, more daring, and of course, richer in many, many ways. What I would like to say about this is the following, that I believe that, yes, I would agree with what Mikhail says about this progress achieved over the past 2 years. I feel this very strongly because every time when we had something, we used to have something problematic, like, public debates. So I used to receive telephone calls saying that, Leonidas, you have to react. And I said, look, I made myself clear 1,000 times. For how long I'm supposed, to repeat the same? So, and they used to say, but you are the one who is not afraid. Okay, there is no need anymore. There are young people who do react on Facebook. There are young ethnic Lithuanians among historians, literary scholars, and especially telling Mikhail, I can tell you, is Parulskis, whom I mentioned already. Sigitas told me, look, the most precious experience when I wrote The Darkness and Company was, I used to be an anti-Semite myself. I was a typical small town anti-Semite. I defeated this in myself. That was a sort of purgatory which I came through.
Very good. And
yeah, I forgot to answer your main question. By the way, I do not like this book, Parulskis. No. I do not like it.
He writes The Night Porter by Cavani, so it's quite interesting.
But what I wanted, I didn't answer the question, what would I ask the president if I could? I would ask her to transfer the remains of the documents of YIVO, which are in our archives, 20% in bad conditions, which could be used in YIVO Institute here and publicized in Lithuania. And I think that both countries and all the researchers and the Lithuanian and Litvaks culture would gain from that enormously. So many years, it's just unbelievable. 20% of the documents of YIVO which are in our archives, and nobody can read them. So why would the government not to do this step and return these rather destroyed documents for YIVO Institute to work on it, to process and to publish it in favor of all of us, the culture of Litvak. That's what really I believe. One thing which I believe is that the culture of Litvaks existed and it will exist, and no one can't fight with it. No wars, no nationalists, no marginals, no one. Litvaks will exist forever. Another thing which I would like also, maybe it's interesting for this auditorium, and it is not really related to unsolved history, but we have another issue now that people start too much to love Jews. We have groups of people who want to be Jews. we became so popular that the name or label of Litvak will be soon, I don't know, a very expensive label. So, but you can't become a Litvak, you have to be born Litvak, and that's for sure. It's, even if you want very, very much, you can't do that. Physically, you can't do. So at least one good feature which I have, I am a Litvak. And our Jewish community is doing so much to promote the Litvaks culture and to promote the relationship between the Litvaks all over the world. So I hope very soon you will get the invitation to come to Lithuania and to commemorate the 70 years anniversary of liquidation of Šiauliai and Kaunas ghetto. It would be some more events. Please do not hesitate to come. We'll try to do our best to feel you good in Lithuania.
If I may, there are some important things I would add to what Faina said. In fact, it's a very interesting tendency that people started celebrating Jewishness in Lithuania like, sort of, celebrity pattern, and people are so happy to reveal that, for instance, that Bob Dylan's mother was a Litvak, or Leonard's Cohen family, Len Cohen, so of Litvak background. So when you say that Luke Yasha Heifetz, and hundreds of great Lithuanian writers, and sometimes even academics don't know that Shakespearean scholar #1, professor at Harvard, Stephen Greenblatt, had his father from Kovna and mother from Vilna. So meaning that he's a Litvak himself. Once he had the inscription in the book which he sent to me saying that from one Lithuanian to another. So that was from Stephen Greenblatt. Indeed, people discovered this as a kind of celebrity pattern which makes Lithuania stronger, richer, more beautiful. But at the same time, there are some, I would say, intimate and very sensitive aspects of this story. Mikhail knows better than anyone else that during the Yiddish courses and seminars in Lithuania, there were some specialists who used to come. For instance, my good friend from Estonia, Anna Vershik, who is your fellow St. Petersburgian. She's from there, and then she married an Estonian husband and lives in Tallinn. And Anna Vershik, who is multilingual, and she used to teach Yiddish. And I know that she was joined by ethnic Lithuanians who teach Yiddish. Eglė Bendikaitė, for instance. So there are some Lithuanians who teach the offspring of Litvaks Yiddish, which is a very promising sign, I have to say. And one more thing, I was really astonished. I've seen much in my life, so I'm not that old, nor am I young, I'm 51. But as an academic, I've seen really much, lecturing in many countries. And once I was really astonished, and that was in Helsinki. When I met the Lithuanian community, there was a special night when they wanted a discussion in Lithuanian with me after an official event at the university. One very intelligent girl, Lithuanian, told me that, look, now I try to speak Yiddish, and I asked, why? Are you Jewish? She said, no, I'm Lithuanian, but I have an idea to try to get facility with all those languages that were spoken in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So she started mastering Polish, Russian, Yiddish, saying that how can I be Lithuanian without this legacy? And I was really astonished. So that I thought I couldn't expect anything like that from my generation. My generation, people who still think that we're victims of the Soviet period and all we need is just a good shot of whiskey and the rest of our life with the ability to spend some days in London, New York, at least after these Soviet years of calamity. But look, we have very different people. Very different people. If I used to split myself into two parts of Donskis, one for West European universities or American universities, another for Lithuania, not in terms of my integrity or my ability to tell the truth, but in terms of some sort of, vocabulary things, some nuances. No, there is no need for that. In Lithuania, I can tell the same story using the same vocabulary that I would use in America now.
To Faina's point, I think on a level of past celebrity is that for the YIVO documents, the tragedy is that we have plenty of specialists and trained people for infrastructure, both ethnic Lithuanians and Jews, who could handle those documents very easily, know what they mean, and save them for research, as you suggest, and that's a matter of political will. And also, not only in terms of people studying Yiddish, I think one of the strangest feelings I had once when I picked up a book by I think it was Eglė Bendikaitė actually, It was called in Lithuanian the Zionist movement in Lithuania, but it's written in Lithuanian by a Lithuanian scholar. This would have been impossible, utterly unthinkable, just from a structural and sort of supply and demand perspective some years back. And so I wouldn't want people to think that ethnic Lithuanian historians who study Jews are interested only in the Holocaust. That is not the case. There is a much more interest also in the 19th century, social relations, commercial relations with Lithuanians, and going back to the Grand Duchy period. And because the three things we need to do, we have to make Jewish history part of Lithuanian history. Secondly, we have to make the Holocaust as the central historical event of the German occupation, unlike any other. And third, we have to confront with honesty and some detail and research the participation of ethnic Lithuanians in the mass murder and genocide of 1941 to 44. And I think if you take, these are three very tall orders, obviously, particularly the last one, emotionally the most difficult, but I think that's the only road to then go to the broader society and say, look, this is what we've done, and try to persuade the low information people that, you know, that they should know this.
If I may, Mikhail, it is a central problem, so I think that Saulius touched upon the nerve of the story. How to integrate Jewish history into the Lithuanian narrative, that's the problem. So I think that up to now the problem is that still the Holocaust is regarded as something uniquely Jewish, and the Second World War as something that split Lithuanians and Jews, and I think that things are much better than they used to be. Thomas Venclova once made a joke that before the Second World War, so that things in Lithuania reminded of one Ray Bradbury story about Martians and Earthlings, where the two categories live, you know, side by side without knowing of each other's existence. Things are better now, and of course, we understand the immense role of Litvaks in Lithuania, but at the same time, it's very important, I would say, it's an existential challenge to Lithuanian culture and education to integrate all those 700 years of Jewish presence, work, and creation into the Lithuanian historical narrative, regarding the Jewish legacy as an inescapable part of Lithuanian history.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just very quick point, and then I will go to question and answers. I'm glad you mentioned Vytautas Toleikis. He's a friend of mine, and I went to speak to his students, high school students, and they were lively, curious kids with all kinds of questions: what it felt to be Jewish in the Soviet Union, what does it mean to be a writer in the United States, how do you speak Russian in America, how do you speak English in Russia, how do you do this, how do you do that? And they were so full of life and curiosity, and their eyes were so shiny. That's the future of the country, I think. That's the future of the country. They're open to anything. They have no prejudice. They just want to be good people and citizens of Europe and citizens of the world while remaining citizens of Lithuania. It was a very gratifying experience, I have to say. So now we go to questions and answers, I suppose, right? How are we going to do this? Because I see several hands at once, but I cannot barely see in the audience.
Okay. Hi. My name is Karen Sutton. I'm from the University of Illinois at Chicago. I wrote a 1996 dissertation on German-Lithuanian collaboration in the final solution. And I want to tell you that I'm very impressed with all your comments. I'm very positive about your remarks. But I am concerned about a couple of ways that you are and encourage perhaps some other look at confronting history. In 1998, the Commission, and it was the European Union, I understand Lithuania was part of that at the time, but to study and evaluate the crimes of the Nazis and the Soviets under one commission. I think that's done enormous political, legal, and social damage in Lithuania. If we're going to teach about the past, yes, definitely teach about the crimes of the Soviets, but teach it in a different vein than the Nazis and the participation of anti-Nazi Jewish partisans who in recent years have been indicted for crimes against Lithuanians. It's a very, very different issue. It should be taught not in symmetry. It's done damage in both rehabilitation, disabilitation. Has there been any attempt by Lithuania, this is my question, to renounce this whole issue of confronting history in that way?
Please, a question, please.
That is the question. Has this commission has it been reconceived? Has it been conceived in error, as I believe it is? Has that been publicly acknowledged? And now is the Holocaust being studied on its own?
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, as a member of that commission, I can answer your question. First of all, one correction. Nobody's been indicted in the anti-Jewish Paris investigation. As embarrassing as that was, there was no indictment. There were people asked to be witnesses in the case, which was dropped later. It was terrible enough, but there was no indictment. Secondly, the reason why there's one commission rather than two. First of all, under Lithuanian law and under the basic law, the period between June 15th, 1940 and the restoration of independence in 1990 is a single block of time. And that is when the country was under foreign occupation, militarily, police-wise, de facto, controlled by outsiders in that sense. So it was politically virtually impossible to say, okay, we're going to treat one occupation as one kind, the other occupation as another. But what did happen, and this discussion came up right away, I was at the founding meeting of the Commission in 1998 with representatives of American Jewish Community, and it was decided, it's in our minutes, it's been publicly stated several times, it's been recorded, that we will not choose any superficial analogies between the two occupations. In the last meeting in October, which reconstituted the Commission, we formally stated, and to the press and to the public, and it's in the minutes, that the two committees act completely independently. The research that they do has no relation to the other subcommittee. They don't even meet together, except for one organizational meeting, or so on. So it's not really a single commission as much as two groups working under one budgetary agency. That's what the story is. Now, this leads us into other issues, the so-called double genocide theory and all this stuff about trying to compare Nazism and communism, or more accurately, Nazism and Stalinism. And that's another issue. And I think people confuse two things. One is the use of the genocide, double genocide theory by extremists and by demagogues to try to equate the Holocaust with Stalinist crimes and so on. That's one issue. We are opposed to that. We've said that publicly in the Commission and elsewhere. However, there is also the legitimate academic enterprise of comparative history by people like Timothy Snyder, Robert Gelately, and others who have analyzed the striking similarities between these two totalitarian systems of mass murder. And there are some striking similarities, even though we acknowledge the uniqueness of the Holocaust. And that's another level at which this discussion goes on. And I wouldn't want people to confuse these two different things. One is a politicized and somewhat dishonest conversation trying to equate, and the idea is this, well, the Jews did something to us, we did something to them, double genocide, and so on. We know that's a dishonest conversation that's been said time and again by most people publicly, and not to confuse that with the academic investigation of comparative studies which are being done now, and the whole conversation that's gone on that level, so on. So I think that that's the story from my perspective as a member of the Commission, having been on the initial organizing event of it, and then having been a member of it for so many years. So there is a lot of noise about this being a single commission, but the reality is that the work on both periods of the occupation are done separately and are not connected to each other.
Hi, I have a question for Leonidas, but also to the panel at large. You had talked about right-wing elements in Lithuania, and you had talked about certain reluctance to discuss these issues, but it seems that there's also an active element in the Lithuanian government that has passed legislation that has not only prevented people from looking at this history, but has actually actively promoted false narratives. I'm thinking of the curiously named Museum of the Genocide in Vilnius, which recently acquired a Jewish room in the basement, and the laws pertaining to the double genocide theory that is pan-European to some extent that the professor has mentioned, the rehabilitation of the swastika as a symbol of historical significance, and the permission to parade it now in Vilnius. And I wonder to what extent those elements in the government are still active. Just very quickly, my impression seems to be that a lot of them have been shamed into silence by the EU and by the internationalization of Lithuania, but it seems to me that figures like Gražulis are still promoting legislation that is actively homophobic, which seems to me to be part of the same right-wing tendency in Lithuania. And I wonder to what degree you think those mainstream politicians, as you call them, still have a future.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I will try somehow to split your very important reflection into two parts. So, with your kind agreement, I would like to start from the second one. Concerning Gražulis, well, I was the one in the parliament who signed a very strong document against this initiative in the Seimas, in the Lithuanian parliament. I was not signing a document against Lithuania. It was against some MPs, against some members of parliaments, including Gražulis, whose initiative really brought much damage to the reputation of Seimas. But to the credit of Lithuania, so President vetoed this twice. I have to say that many MPs were very strongly opposed to this tendency. And we have a very, very difficult debate concerning homosexuality and LGBTI things, mainly because it's a Catholic country with many conservative sensitivities where politicians are simply lacking courage to go to the public and say that how can we marginalize the rights of our fellow citizens? It's nonsense, and decriminalization of homosexuality was one of the conditions that Lithuania accepted joining the EU. And I think that this is simply lack of political courage sometimes to evaluate people like Gražulis. Well, but he is a disgrace, and Lithuania knows it. Not long ago in Strasbourg, he started praising Russia for Russia's anti-gay and anti-lesbian legislation, which was, something that doesn't need any commentary. So he simply said too much about himself, Gražulis. And the first part of your question, I would say that, yes, I'm very strongly opposed to any kind of artificial equations and artificial comparisons of communism and Nazism for a very simple reason. Had we been absolutely clear and honest concerning our history, we would have been able to come up with the idea of, upgrading the story of communism and anything. But as long as anti-Semites try to squeeze their agenda in documents like the Prague Declaration, or anything similar, I will be opposed. Because I know that Václav Havel's agenda was very different from the agenda of those MEPs and my colleagues who wanted to squeeze their agenda in that declaration. So if we try to justify our war criminals only because they were killing another category of criminals, so to say, so I'm very much opposed to this kind of forgery and this kind of travesty. But I would say that the government doesn't promote this philosophy. What I perceive in Lithuania is sometimes lack of coordination. It's lack of coherence, lack of coordination. There are people who start demonizing, Jewish partisans, and there was a shameful story of Yitzhak Arad, and we know it. And Saulius and I, we had a conversation with Yitzhak in Israel, because after that, because we felt responsible for the conversation with him. But I have to say that, in fact, it's lack of coordination which led to disastrous consequences in some cases. The Genocide Center, the Genocide Research Center, refused to expose some war criminals, saying that, it's very sensitive to their families and elsewhere. This led to horrible consequences. We know a fact which is a public secret, or the secret of Polichinelle, as they say in France, that one high school is named after Generolas Vėtra, the General Vėtra, who is a documented war criminal and who killed many Jews. So, and Julius Noreika, or Generolas Vėtra, people in Žemaitija know it quite well. Ethnic Lithuanians were saying that that was a disgrace, but that was only due to the fact that these facts were not made available to the public. And that was a big, big mistake that the center made. And I think that professional historians, academic historians, must correct it.
Yeah, I congratulate you on your question about the Genocide Museum, because now it's 100%, because I've never been to a forum similar to this one where that question has not come up. And so thank you. And the thing is, I wish Lithuanians had done something like the Latvians and call it the Museum of the Occupation. Rather than this. I don't think Soviet policy in Lithuania qualifies as genocide. I don't think so. I think they used that word as misnamed for that center. And I think, and that goes back to, and there is a movement to change that. How that will follow, I don't know. I mean, genocide was an integral part of Nazism. And mass murder was an integral part of Stalinism. But I wouldn't call that particular crimes against humanity committed by the Soviet regime, during World War II, by the way, as somehow genocide. On the other hand, from a moral and ethical perspective, I don't see much difference between mass murder and genocide, although historians like to pick and choose, which concept is where. But, you know, you're right, that KGB museum, and I know people who've worked there, I know people in the research center, and as another ironical thing is, the research center attached to that museum has a publication and has a section that deals with Holocaust issues. And in fact, some of the better articles that have appeared lately have appeared in their journal. I mean, you know, a country of crooked mirrors. I wish they would change the name of it, and you know, it would be wonderful if they could combine, you know, they could introduce a Holocaust museum that would be something other than that little greenhouse in Vilnius and the other stuff on Pylimo Street. You know, that would be better. You know, I agree with you there.
Yes, my question was, and my suggestion was about changing the name of the Genocide Museum. First, I want to thank the speakers for the clarity of the presentation. I introduce myself. My name is Isabel Rosenbaumas, and you underlined, Leonidas, the importance of working on education. It's 5 years or 7 years that I am leading a project of education about Jewish girls' education in Lithuania in the Gymnasium Yavne in Tels. And I promoted this project. I brought it to a gymnasium in Telshai. Tels is Telshai in Žemaitija. I am a Vilnius born of Telshai Jewish survivors. So, in a nutshell. So I brought this project to the Vincenzo Borisevicius Gymnasium in Telshai. I worked with them 2 years in a row. It was brought also to the Academy of Art in Telshai, and from this, the history of these girls, young artists produced works and creations. And Telshai, as you know, is a paradigmatical place of unresolved history. You know that my interest didn't begin with education. It began with the murder of 500 girls.
Please ask us a question. Please ask a question.
I skip the question, and I finish in 1 minute. So in Telshai, the 500 girls were murdered at the end of the cycle of murder of men, then women and children, and they were murdered on December 41. And if I decided to focus on education and not the murder of the girls, it is because during my 10 or 15 trips to Lithuania since 2000, where I made a film and I created this project, I have decided that Lithuania is probably worth it. But I just think that politics is much more involved than you seem to present it. So, yes, changing the name of this museum is a crucial thing to do for Lithuanian government. Changing the presentation of Telshai murder site is a crucial thing to do for Lithuanian authorities. So, thank you for.
Thank you. I also appreciated this very much and learned a great deal from it. I led a study tour to the Baltics in 2011. Two things disturbed me very much, and I was wondering if you could comment on that and maybe shed some more light on it. First was the question of the Jewish partisans, the elderly ladies who were arrested, and I think that's what you were getting at, Professor. Was it that case? Faina Brankowski.
They were never arrested.
Okay, let me see if it's the same people. First of all, Faina Brankowski and Dr. Margolis, are those the two we're talking about? Yeah. Okay. they were not arrested, but charged with war crimes. And I...
No, they
All
were
right,
not.
fine.
Correct.
Okay, well, here's where I'm going to learn from you then. You're going to set me straight, okay? My understanding is that the charges, though, have not yet been formally dropped against them. Am I right, at least about that?
There were no charges to be dropped.
Okay.
The request for Margolis
Yes.
and Francois were to appear as witnesses in a preliminary investigation involving Yitzhak Arad and that whole incident. That case against Arad was dropped, 2 years ago, I think?
More.
Yeah, more than 2 years ago, formally by the procurator, in what I consider in a very ungracious statement. Should have said it was all a disaster from the beginning, but it was saying no, not enough evidence, something like this. But be that as it may, it was discontinued. The whole affair was very troublesome for the commission because Yitzhak Arad was a member of our group, and we could not meet, well, obviously, under those conditions. I want to make one small comment about this, and it comes back to, again, language and experience. The word anti-fascist, and I'm not being facetious about this, does not carry that warm feeling among ethnic Lithuanians that it does in the West, because what kind of anti-fascists did they know? I mean, mainly Stalinists. That was their experience. And the problem is when people have an experience, you can't question the experience. You can only try to explain what the experience is in a larger context, you see?
Yes.
So when I have to address a person, he says, well, I knew these anti-fascists, they were Stalinists. I says, well, wait a minute, you know, anti-fascism in itself is a good thing, and so on, and try to explain people the historical context. But when there's a barrier right at the beginning, when you use a word that has a certain meaning to people, yes, then it's a barrier that's difficult to break. And so what I want to say about the whole partisan case, yes, it was a terrible embarrassment, and the people who cooked it up, by the way, knew what they were doing, because if the president stops the investigation, he'll be accused of interfering with the judiciary. If he doesn't say anything, he's accused of pursuing these poor old people who are heroes against the war against Nazism. So, you know, I mean, it placed the government in a very uncomfortable position. And this was, I think, in some sense, my personal belief, I am going a little bit on the limb, but this was a provocation. The whole incident. Well, if you know the story, Yitzhak Arad wrote a memoir called The Partisan, which was published in the late 70s. And it has two incidents in it that, when I read it, I knew that as someone who had an unfriendly attitude towards our commission, other things, read it, that they would exploit it. One is the attack on a village in which some houses were burned. And so this is not the famous Kanyuke case. This is the different operation by the partisans to get food and so on, and to punish unfriendly villagers. And the second incident was the killing of an Armia Krajova lieutenant that he admitted to in his memoir. Legal terms, that's the killing of a anti-Nazi movement by a recognized Allied government. But of course the context in Eastern Lithuania was that the Armia Krajova, the Home Army, often committed anti-Semitic excesses. So if you pull out the context from those memoirs and just focus on these two incidents, that was what was published in the newspapers in the I think in Valstiečių laikraštis, was it not? And this information was given to the newspapers by people who wanted to publicize to create a problem from Yitzhak Arad. And they succeeded. So that's the background to it. And then, of course, the procurator starts. The definition of genocide under the Lithuanian legal code is somewhat different than it is on the 1940 Convention of 49. And so that was used then to create this legal investigation. Now, again, nobody was arrested during the investigation. Nobody was indicted. It was bad enough that the case was opened at all, considering the context, the historical context of a teenager who flees, whose family's been murdered. I have Arad in mind, who flees to the forests, and Joy is the only resistance group that will accept them. And to use that as some sort of case, as a preliminary investigation of a war crime is, of course, absurd and insulting. But again, it was done in such a way that if the government acted against the procurator, accusations of interfering in the judicial process would be immediately, raised. That's.
I'm sorry, but I'm asking for enlightenment. Many of us have don't know the details. The motivation of Procurator going forward with this was.
Well, there had been several cases against people who had committed crimes during the Soviet occupation. And he apparently perceived this as one of them. And apparently, he felt that given this evidence, he had to proceed with an investigation. Otherwise, he would be accused of covering something up. You know how these things work out. So I think, I don't know the man, I don't know the motivation exactly, but the way in which the information filtered through the press, remember, this is now in the public sphere. And the information is then brought to the procurator, and it's published in the newspapers, and then people will ask him, so what are you doing about it? So I imagine that that was the response to it. Again, I'm somewhat going on a limb a little bit because this happened rather quickly, and none of us knows every detail of what went on behind the scenes, but this is sort of the sequence of events.
If I may add regarding Faina Kukliansky and Margolis, these two ladies which were mentioned. So I can tell you, I was their lawyer, and the case started in Poland, not in Lithuania, many years ago, because of Kaniukai, this village Kaniukai. And Faina Kukliansky and Margolis had to give evidences as witnesses. What was done in a very bad and non-polite way, somebody from the public prosecutor department announced in a press conference that they can't find Faina Kukliansky, they do not know the address, they have to search her. This lady is more than 90 years old. She lives all her life after the war in the same flat. Nobody had to look for her. She came to my office, and the prosecutor came also to my office. She gave some evidences about, explained some circumstances just formally, and that's it. They never were accused as criminals. They just were questioned or interviewed as witnesses. And Margolis did not give even interview as a witness. That's it. She's in Israel, and she refused to give the interview even in the embassy of Lithuania. So that's it.
Excuse me. The question was, did she flee to Israel because she was afraid?
No. She lives in Israel for many, many years. Yes. I'm wrong with that. I'm not wrong with that. She is also about 90 years old. She lives in Israel all her life after the war. So I'm not wrong with that at all. Faina Kukliansky lives in Lithuania. So.
Okay. My name's Deborah Woroff. I'm a journalist and independent historian. I have some direct questions about history. One, the first is the way you've described the facts. It sounds like the invasion of Lithuania by the Nazis and the slaughter of the Jews was a duplication of what Father Desbrosses has documented in Ukraine, where there was a systematic Holocaust of bullets carried out by the Einsatzgruppen, and that the local assistance was provided in terms of stripping down the victims before they were shot into large pits of brickworks or whatever, and taking their jewels and providing such services to the Einsatzgruppen. But I'm not sure. That's the way it comes. You mentioned 1941, and you mentioned a certain suddenness, and I just wonder if that is indeed the case or if I am misconcluding.
Oh, it is. Look, the period between 1941 and the initiation of the German invasion and the end of that year, let's say 1941, the murders occurred in certain stages. What I was referring to as the beginning of the actual genocide, understood as a mass program of extermination, not pogroms and not selective shootings, even those were large scale in early July, but the decision to kill women and children by the Einsatzgruppe A. And it was, and the local assistant was more than stripping and stealing jewelry, because we know this was well organized because the killings occurred in almost exactly the same way in each locale. It was well organized. Usually it involved a small group of German officers and non-coms, usually, and the majority of the actual killers were Lithuanians drawn from the police battalions, which had been created by early July and later 1941. This is after the Nazis are now in full control of the country, de facto. And so the relationship that is in the YIVO report indicates that the German relationship among the groups that did the actual killing was 1 to 8. That is 8 Lithuanians to 1 German. But that's generalism. That's the generality. Now, in addition to that, there was cooperation by certain local police precincts who were not part of the Einsatzgruppen, but convoyed, guarded, and otherwise assisted in the bureaucratic structure of the mass murder. But we do have the documents, starting in early August, of orders to the police to collect Jews in certain areas, ostensibly for deportation to labor camps. Now, after the first 2 weeks, even the thickest police head should have understood what that meant. But at first, I think some of the local police didn't exactly know what was happening. They just got the order. It was carried out by phone without, and carried out through a certain part of Suvalkija. We have very good documentation for that. And they did that. Then followed these mobile killing groups, just like Ukraine, a similar process, which went from, mainly it was the Jews of the provinces and in the medium-sized towns. Actions of very different size, in some cases massive killings like in Marijampolė and let's say in Rokiškis, thousands, and in smaller areas, maybe a couple of hundred. It all depended, and so the size of the killing unit was, made for that purpose, big or large, and that's the part, the real genocidal part of this program of persecution and killing that I was describing, not the initial stage where you have some pogroms and then you have early executions in the forts in early July, but even those are carried out by militarized units. These are not, most Lithuanian Jews who died did not die at the hands of their neighbors in the literal sense. Most of them died as victims of these mobile killing squads. Some were killed by their neighbors, of course. We have some documentary evidence on that. So, and almost all were killed after the Germans had arrived, actually. So that's what I was describing.
Thank you. And there were Judenrat involved or not?
Oh, no. I mean, look, one of the things anti-Semites say often is, well, Jews collaborated with the Nazis as well, Jewish police in the Kaunas ghetto and Vilnius ghetto, and there's one extremely tragic event in the Vilnius ghetto that you may know about from Genz's police force where they took part in an execution. But to compare the position of the Jewish police in the context of the German occupation is not only absurd, I think it's somewhat insulting from a human point of view. They were victims as well. The Germans killed these policemen eventually too. I mean, this was not a, this is a horrible piece of history to read through and reflect on, but, that is one way in which sometimes it's manipulated.
And the second part of that question, in Poland, the Germans systematically slaughtered the Polish intellectual class and what we would call the chattering classes. And they don't seem to have done that in Lithuania. Why not?
No. In fact, one of the ways in which the Lithuanian collaborators would frighten their people was to say, if you guys don't behave, they're going to treat you just like in Poland. Everyone understood that the worst place on the planet in the 40s was the general government of Poland around Warsaw. That was the black hole of inhuman suffering. There was some arrests in 1943 of Lithuanian intellectuals who were sent to Stutthof, where some of them died, because the Lithuanian population refused to engage in the SS volunteer program, the mobilization, en masse, because they perceived it as, just as Lithuanian soldiers in the Red Army weren't going to die for Stalin in June 41, they weren't eager to die for Hitler either. I mean, as a general rule. So unlike in Latvia and Estonia, there were no Lithuanian SS divisions, or Waffen-SS. And for that reason, there was some repression. Some high schools were closed, universities were closed, and 46 intellectuals were arrested, the most prominent people taken to Stutthof. But most of them survived, and I think only a half dozen died at the camp. But you can't compare it to Poland in any way.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. You can grab that.
On the more concrete level, I understand that Lithuanian society is not ripe yet, but were there any attempts since 1991 to include the 700 years of history and the Roma history in the textbooks or in anything more official, formal?
Yes, I would say there were many attempts, but the problem remains that there is a big gap between university educational curricula and high schools in Lithuania. So it's more of a technical problem, but it resulted in a very inaccurate and sometimes incomplete programs in high schools. Whereas at the university level, we have very good curricula and students are really knowledgeable, and there are many wonderful European programs concerning Jewish studies, Holocaust studies. In high schools, it's on much, much lower level. And that's why this gap has to be filled by professional historians, by university professors. It's a typical gap, very characteristic of East and Central Europe, where there is a long distance between university programs and high schools. That's why some enthusiasts, of course, they had very noble intentions, but, you know, they were just... A person who was mentioned here, Vitas Toreikis, is a very exceptional case. He's a very enlightened high school teacher who participates almost everywhere, who created himself very important educational programs in Lithuania, and he is knowledgeable and politically active enough to fulfill them. In most cases, we have people with very good intentions, yet with very little political support, and with minimal support from the university folks. So that's why it's a gap, and we have to fill it. So please believe me, Faina and myself, we talk about it almost every day, that we have to do something about how to involve the best of our academics to help high schools.
It's just actually young people in high schools and colleges that I'm interested from the Jewish community. It seems to me that from people whom I have met who are young, who are working on issues of Jewish culture, in Vilnius in particular, none of them are Jewish. And so I'd like to hear from you something about where you think young Jewish people in Vilnius are today in terms of thinking about the past.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really an issue. First of all, we have to separate the Jewish community and the professionals who work in the Jewish community. So in our Jewish community, mostly the professionals, they're Jews, but some of them are non-Jewish, and I'm very happy with what they're doing. Very skillful, very devoted. As regards to the academical youth, which is involved in the Jewish topic, first of all, there are not too many people at all involved. We are talking about perhaps 5-6 young people who are interested in the Jewish culture, in Yiddish language, and it's really a pity. I don't know, the Jews perhaps they're looking for a better job, and maybe they're doing a better business, they are in high tech, they are in big business. Here you have to be very much devoted without very big salary. You just have to put your heart into that. But I can tell you that we are now working on creating a Jewish Yiddish study institution in Vilnius, which would be focused not only on Yiddish language, which is still alive in Jewish community, and actually all the leadership of the Jewish community speaks Yiddish, but also to study Yiddish, Hebrew, not Hebrew, but Yiddish culture. So we think that these efforts will give the results. Besides that, we have Jewish school where we have Jewish teachers. We have people who are coming from Israel and helping us. We have 400 Israeli students who are studying in Kaunas University, and somebody takes care about them. So it's enough Jews involved. We are just talking a lot about Lithuanians who, for us, perhaps it's very unusual that they are non-Jewish, but they're involved in the Jewish issues. So maybe, therefore, you have got such an impression.
Very briefly, I would add that, in fact, it's more of a symbolic gesture, but it's quite important for Lithuanian society. For instance, when young people work in Jewish cemeteries, trying to restore the graves, the graveyards, so we have a number of high school teachers and students who are Lithuanians, and they work in Jewish cemeteries. So it's an initiative which is quite developed in Lithuania. So, and this is an important thing, because just imagine someone in his or her teens. These are very important moral lessons, and they receive them. And at the same time, there is a growing interest among young people. I can judge because I can judge this very easily because I participate in a cultural initiative organized by Vice Minister of Culture of Lithuania, Darius Mažintas, who is a superb pianist himself, and he's an enthusiast of Jewish culture. He plays, and an opera singer whose name is Rafailas Karpis. He sings Jewish songs, and yours truly serves as a narrator, telling a story about Jewish culture in Lithuania. Believe it or not, we have dozens of young people from schools, and there is a growing interest, and beside Vilnius, there are some requests to come with this program to smaller towns.
Yeah, I will add that right now, this year, we have won the funds from the Norwegian funds, and it is a Begele project. It's to open, the sense is to open the Jewish society to the Lithuanian society, to invite more people to our Jewish community, to tell about our history and to show us. And I hired 3 Lithuanian people, not Jewish, but Lithuanian, because I think, first of all of them are specialists in their field. Secondly, I think that these bright people, not anti-Semitic people, educated young people, they're the bridge between Lithuanian Jewish community and the society. We, by the way, in Lithuania, in Vilnius, we never had a ghetto, only during the war. The Jews were not closed at all, neither in Lithuania. But if we want to be more open, to have better contact with our society, we have to work on it. So on one hand, we are hiring Lithuanian people to work for us. On another hand, the Jewish society becomes, Jewish young people becomes more closer to the Lithuanian young people. So that's good. The integration is good.
We're going to squeeze in one very last question.
Thank you. You mentioned that young people taking care for Jewish cemetery. Can you describe what is in general the condition of Jewish cemetery and mass graves of victims of Holocaust? Second, does government participate in this process to restoration and take care for the Jewish cemetery? And what is the situation today with the Jewish, with restitution, with property, with land in Lithuania? And by the way, my name is Yakov Gutman, and I am president of the World Association of Belarusian Jewry. Thank you.
You are chair of Belarusian Jewish. Best regards to our neighbors. They're also Litvaks, part of them at least. Shimon Peres, for example, we consider, and he considers himself as a Litvak. So I'll tell you shortly about the situation with cemeteries and with mass murdering places. According to the Lithuanian law, the state is responsible for taking care about it. But we have really a problem, and we have problem not only with with Jewish cemeteries, we have a total problem with cemeteries because nobody is fulfilling the laws and orders of the government to fix the borders of the cemeteries. So nobody knows where the cemetery starts and where it's finished. And with the Jewish cemetery, we have a especially big problem because before the war, they were outside the city, and today they're inside the city. And everybody wants to build something on that, and we have really to protect it. So not long ago, we have had a special meeting in the government, and I think that the things will move, but we have to watch. And we have people, hired special group of people who are watching the situation with the heritage. You have to have time to go to the small city, and we have about 140 cemeteries and 200 of mass murdering places. Can you imagine that it is a huge job, even though we are not responsible according to the law, we are responsible because of our neshama. This is part of our community, this is part of our society, and we have to do our best. There are some investments which are coming from abroad, and the people are coming and they're very angry, calling me and telling that the grass is very high. Then I call the chair, the chief of the local community, and ask to take care. But this is the life, you know, every way is the same. The only difference that this is not our property, and we do not want to have it as a property. It is completely responsibility of the state because there are not enough Jews to take care about all this mass murdering and cemeteries. Now, the second your question was about the heritage. Yes, protection of the heritage. Restitution was the third question. Second question was protect the heritage. And it is really a very difficult question because in 1992, about 20 synagogues were returned to the Jewish community, which had any commercial value at all. Before they were somehow used by the local people, there were clubs or there were, I don't know, something, at least somebody. It was heating, it was cleaning, it was windows, and when they returned to the Jewish community, nobody took care anymore about them because there are not enough sources to do that. So it's really an issue, and we are trying to do our best. Now the issue number one is a wonderful, wonderful synagogue in Vilnius, the most important. It's not the great synagogue. It's not this. It's another synagogue, which is very close to the railway station. And each Jew, then he used to come to city. First of all, he used to go to the synagogue to pray. And this Zadels, it was Zadel synagogue. It used to work 24 hours per day. Now the shape is terrible. And we are trying to do our best to return it in the normal condition and perhaps to use it together with the city for the Jewish and non-Jewish events. And regarding the restitution. So there are good news, there are bad news, whatever you want, whatever you choose. So good news that finally the restitution, the loan restitution has been passed. And at least 30% of the former value of the communal property has been returned, or at least government has an obligation to pay out 125 million in 10 years, 12.5 million per year. The liters. Divided from 2.5. That are not big money. It's really, it's small money, but it's very big for us money. And it's a big challenge to use it in a proper way and to leave it for the future generation because we can't see any other money which would come additionally to that. All these years, the Jews from the United States, the International Jewish Organization used to support us. And really we are very thankful. Without you, we wouldn't be able to be at all today as a community. And I can assure that all the community understands that and really is very thankful to the World Jewry for the support. Part of the money, very small, 3 million liters, they had to be paid out to the survivors, just like symbolic compensation. It's even not a compensation. We never consider that as a compensation of the harm which was done during the war. Just, I don't know, symbolic gesture, let us say it so, because also from the commercial side, we put so much efforts to identify these people, to find out their bank accounts, to send the money, that, well, it's not a business. It's just a nice gesture of the government. And we finally, with the private property, it is a disaster because private property was not returned to the Jews who left Lithuania and were not citizens of Lithuania until 2001. So actually all the property which was lost, which did not have any owners, uninherited property, and the property which had owners, but the people used to live in Israel, it was not returned. So this is the situation, and unfortunately I do not think that there is a lot of hope to return it back, because the law should be changed, and it is not so easy to do. At least I spent 20 years of my life for that, but unsuccessfully. That's it.
Well, I guess this brings us to a close. As you can see, this conversation probably could go on for another several hours or days. It's a very involved and difficult and very interesting conversation. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. And thank you.